there's an element to cozy fantasy that really works in that regard. That I get because one
Mm,
of my favorite games to used to play when I just wanted to chill out was Harvest Moon, and that is arguably there's no fail state in Harvest Moon. You're farming,
mm,
you're trying to find a wife, you're
mm.
picking eggs and milking your cows. There's an element to that that's enjoyable. To you just sit down
The
and you just
side quest
really
sort of thing is enjoyable as well
almost
in more games. Yeah.
right. But to me, I'm also a child of the 80s, so I'm very big in the action adventure side of things. So to me, sprinkling out those slice of life things, that's why
Mm,
a lot of web comics that focus on slice of life stuff about say superheroes and fantasy stuff ends
mm.
up getting such a big audience. They find those elements between the action and the quests
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
fascinating, and just
Yeah.
watching the and it is a great chance for your characters to interact with each other,
Mm.
and you get to showcase character interactions, and that helps the characters really build on their relationships. But to me, it's got to be sprinkled throughout a narrative, very,
Yeah.
kind of conservatively, and not going too long, because otherwise you risk boring your reader.
Yeah.
I'm with Razorfist on games as a storytelling medium. They need to stop
Mm.
trying to be interactive movies
Yeah.
and
Yeah. That's
focus on
true.
being games.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
game interaction element that we come for, and the more you add those game elements. Red Dead Redemption 2, probably a perfect example. It'll probably be a perfect game for a long time before
Yeah.
that gets usurped, because
Mm.
there's so many game elements. There's so many role playing elements, and the storytelling is there, but it does
I
it in the
can't remember
context,
the.
right?
If you're not going
And
to provide it, they're not going to read it as well. So.
and the lion's share of the remaining comics fans and readers have kind of shifted into the indie spaces, and
Which
they're
is good.
either buying other indie comics to kind of fill that gap, or they end up making their own comics
Mm.
to and that's always you've got several examples of that in history, where people who are dissatisfied with what the creative directions that a big corporate IP is going, that they'll end up creating their own rivals. Like,
Mm.
for instance, um, Don Bluth was a disgruntled Disney animator, and he absolutely ate Disney's lunch when it came to animated movies in the 80s.
Mm.
You had, what was it? WWE spun off AEW with disgruntled wrestlers and fans.
Mm. Yeah.
Arguably,
Yeah.
they're not really competition now, but that's a whole other
Mm.
discussion.
Yeah.
Look, people did not like fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, so you had a company that that recreated essentially the 3.5 system, and that wound up being Pathfinder. So
Mm.
D&D's biggest competition is basically itself. It's a former edition published as Pathfinder now. And that was another example of this. Like, Image Comics was created from disgruntled Marvel and DC creatives who were
Mm.
tired of being told what they wanted, what they could or couldn't do, but as well as not really having any control over the characters that they created. So
Mm.
again, they're going to end up creating their own competition, and they're not going to course correct until it's probably too late. And by then, you'll have an audience that will have been siphoned off forever from that end.
Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the World of Momos podcast. And on this episode of Reflections and Reactions, we have my friend John A. Douglas from Louisiana. He is an indie writer, a podcaster, and actually a registered nurse as well, which I find pretty impressive. He has his debut book out, The Black Crown. It is a fantasy and has a lot and lot of orcs. So if you like orcs, you're going to like this book. He also has a podcast, and you can find it on YouTube, Rumble, and other streaming channels, simply titled Author John A. Douglas, which covers reviews of indie books, conversations, and thoughts and reactions around fantasy and other fiction. And all links I'll put in the description below, so do go check it out. Today, we are going to talk about the downfall, sort of like a downfall of mainstream fantasy and superhero fiction, and find out why it is happening. Hi there, Douglas. How are you?
Thank you for having me on. Good to be here.
Yeah, so let's get into it. What do you think is going on, or do you feel there is a downfall in the quality and in the narration and off?
From my perspective, as someone that's been reading fantasy for a long time, it's merely a shift in the targeting of the demographics of the readers, where in the past, fantasy especially appealed to mainly a male demographic. You occasionally had, now, if you guys hear me clear my throat or cough a little bit. I've got the beginnings of a cold. You can probably hear it in my voice a little bit, but we'll try and push
We'll
through.
forgive you.
Okay, so just ignore my occasional noises. Traditionally, for a long time, this was usually the domain of male-centric readers, and it was cultivated, written by male men for men, and with an understanding of they knew what appealed to them, and that doesn't necessarily mean a bunch of cheesecake, so
Mm.
to speak, to borrow a term from anime, but in action and adventure and exploration and a character you're watching rise up and fight for what they want. But and you had some female authors and readers that understood that, and that appealed to them as well. What happened is a lot of the shifts in the demographics they started to see that there was money in a female demographic, and so
Mm.
they started making more books that are kind of targeted in that direction. And so now, with a lot of the traditional publishing, if you go and look on the main like physical bookstores and the Walmart shelves, where I used to be able to go and just pick up fantasy no problem. It's mostly, young adult books written by female authors, edited by female editors, targeted to a female demographic. And the appeal for the male demographic is not there like it used to be. So, from my perspective, a lot of this has kind of shifted into the indie spaces.
Mm.
And, it's not to say a female author can't write a fantasy book that appeals to men as well. The ones who are really good at it are very good at it. I'll use an example here. One of my favorite authors of all time, Sarah Douglas, and she understood how to appeal to both men and women, and she wrote characters. She understood how to write characters that way, kind of understanding how to write characters that are universally appealing, but also
Mm.
characters that appeal to what a male reader or a female reader wants and is appealing to them. It's kind of key when you're writing. And I mean, you think about it, why do a lot of guys not watch Lifetime? It's not appealing to them. It's
Mm.
appealing to a certain demographic.
Yeah, I mean, and the reason why like the indie scene is really picking up, and there's a lot of good fantasy now in indie scene, and there's a lot of people that are coming up with more creative ways for the stories and how to present their books, and so on and so forth. That shows that the male or the previous demand hasn't dropped. The demand is still
Oh,
there. It's just that the
yes.
supply has changed direction
Yes.
and disregarded a whole demographic of demand, which is actually higher than this new demographic, anyways.
That's very much true, and you see that with the drop off in comic readership.
Hmm.
And they did the same thing in comics that they did with the traditional publishing, is they started to try and capture what they felt was an untapped audience, and in doing so, they made comics that are more that are written by that demographic for that demographic, and the demographic that was originally there and kind of shifted elsewhere. And in part, that also comes from the creators attacking the fan base for complaining
Yeah.
that they didn't like the change in creative shift. And and this has been talked about a lot. There was a Facebook poll that got put up years and years ago in the early aughts about how many potential women would want to read comic books, and it was like or how many actually read comic books. It was like a 50-50 split. And they took that and they said, well, okay, there's an untapped market. So we've got
Mm.
to make these comics appeal more to women. And they started doing that by, losing what appealed to men.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the male demographics for comic readers ended up dropping off. And now what you're seeing is a really, really big rise in indie comics that are made by disenfranchised male readers,
Yeah.
because they're not getting what they want from a creative standpoint.
Mm.
They're not getting that really good action packed fun adventures. You get a lot of comics nowadays that are people sitting down and talking about their feelings,
I was
having
just going to say that, right? So,
lectures,
it,
and usually you can always
exactly.
tell when a
Yeah.
California woman wrote it, because
Yeah.
they're always doing this over meals or drinks.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sort of like it's you can have that aspect, but they are overdoing it. And
Yeah,
even when you see like the shows, even getting out of comics and stuff, when you see the TV shows and stuff, all the superheroes want to talk about their feelings, their bloody feelings all the time. It's like, well, it's a bit too much, you know. There's a time and a place for it. You need to be a bloody hero. That's why
yeah.
we're watching
There
it. You have to go on an adventure, you have to
is
suck it up,
there
and
has
you have to do
what
it.
happened. What happened to punching a, stopping a supervillain from taking over the world?
Yeah,
Stop a bank robbery,
yeah,
save a kitten, do something. But
yeah,
this, proselytizing
yeah.
over issues that are important to you when in your creative college
Hmm.
writing course are not important to a
No.
comic book reader. They don't want to hear all that.
And that we saw that clearly in the bastardization of Lord of the Rings with Rings of Power, right? Because what we saw is like, well, Lord of the Rings, that whole world already had strong female characters, but they were strong female characters according to their strengths, right? So, and they represented, they were not trying to be something else apart from themselves, and that's why they were strong. You know, what we saw in Rings of Power was this belligerent Gladriel, such petulant person who is completely different from what she's supposed to be, just because it's trying to show, oh, she's a badass. It's like, and they made all the male characters pretty weak, like not even just physically weak, but the Elrond and stuff, like their character wise, what they were
They're not
projecting.
strong characters.
Yeah, and I was like, well, why does it have to be? Why do you have to put your student activist propaganda into fantasy, right? Because that's what it feels like. Everything has to be either you have to put some social, political, or activist point of way through, and no matter what series they make, there has to be a point when one of the character lectures other characters about something.
Yeah, excuse me. And if you're not a talented enough writer to try and integrate that in a
Yeah.
competent way, it's not going to come over well. I'll use one really good example. This was Terry Goodkind, and he was a very prominent fantasy author throughout the 90s and the 2000s, and he was a very staunch libertarian. And there were times really tried to put his libertarian bent into the
Hmm.
narrative of his world. And sometimes it kind of worked. And then there were other times where he had characters literally just giving a sermon on the Mount that would go on for page after page after page. And, that turned a lot of people away along with
Yeah.
some of the content that he put in there. It, a lot of the people in Hollywood, like, it really comes from a place of incompetency. They write this stuff because that's
Hmm.
all they
Hmm.
know. You had, especially with the advent of the Me Too union, where you saw a bit of a power shift in Hollywood, and they started to say, okay, the old, Hollywood's been run by old white guys for so
Hmm.
long, and they're misogynistic. The overcorrection was to put women in charge of everything,
Yeah.
without a bit of meritocracy to try and help kind of balance that out.
And a
And
particular kind of woman as well. It's not like there's no problem of women being in whatever positions and stuff, but it's particular kind of people, not just women, other people as well, like men as well, who had an activist uh, trend to themselves, right? A bend of activism to them, which came before anything else. I think so that is more detrimental than, anything.
Well, I was about to get there. You had
Mm,
they ended up they hired a lot of people straight out of college. The part of the
mm,
reason the writing in Hollywood these days does not feel up to par with what we had in the past is because older writers ended up using a lot of real life experience to inform on their writing. You'll see this
mm,
in people who have a lot of that. Sarah Douglas is a good example. She was a
mm,
nurse for 17 years, went back to
mm,
school, became a professor of history. And this showed in her writing, but like you could really see she took the stuff that she learned and put that into her writing. All right, Snow's another female author who does that. She's a Texas housewife, but she has a lot of life experience, and she's able to
Mm,
put that into her work. When you have when you have college graduates coming into directly into the writers' room, their life experience is just college. That's where you get a lot of the talking about your feelings and sitting there over food and drinks. Because what's the highlight of a college student's day? You know, you go to class and then you're out of class and you go. It's mealtime and you go and chit chat with your friends and have drinks, and that life experience of going out there, you know, having to work a blue collar job, you know, going through experiences that both hurt and help you in
mm.
life goes a long way for a writer.
Yeah. And even like, even if, let's say, you have had a pleasant life, after college for 20 years or whatever, doesn't mean that you have to suffer. It's just that in that 20 years you would have seen other lives around you, and that would have shaped your experiences a bit better. You just would have had more experience what it is like to pay your bills, get a mortgage, even like, get married, like have kids or not have kids, or see your friends have kids, and like, all these things shape you, going through what's happening in your own country, like, all the social issues, they inform you in that way. And I think so also a lot of what's happened in the art, I personally find this is people have turned the role of an artist into a job, right? So, and they're just doing a job. Like in a job, you have a set of rules that you follow, and they have created those rules, and nobody's going to do anything other than that because they're just treating it as a job. So rather than one writer creating a show or creating a comic or creating like a book or something, there's a team of writers, and they all are doing their jobs, you know, and that takes precedence.
Yeah, and creativity by committee, it
Mm,
can work, but it requires a right combination. You end up getting too many cooks and you'll spoil the broth. And we see that going on with a lot of the MCU shows, a lot the Star Wars movies. You had too many different creatives with different
yeah.
directions, and it ends up resulting in a disjointed product that does not feel satisfactory. Does not. There is something to be said for the singular visionary
Mm,
and a unified story going through
yeah.
something. Now, don't get me wrong. Editors are a good part of that process too. I have
Mm,
my editors, I have my beta readers, so
mm.
there is a bit of a collaborative effort. But
But they
in
come
those can help you,
after. They come after you created.
right? And having too many people trying to put too many ingredients into the same pot at the same time doesn't come out to a satisfying whole.
Mm. So one of the other things as well that I have noticed and like is that people like producers and investors and whatever, they're obviously involved into this, so they made it into a business and they created jobs and stuff like that around it. So it's become this creative thing has become a product for them, right? So they're more concerned about making money out of it rather than making the art of the storytelling, right? So their main concern is how much we can get back from it and how much should we put towards it. So they're making stuff primarily for an audience or something, or they're honing to an audience that they think is there or whatever. It's about the audience, whereas before it used to be people creating it, and you create good and the right audience finds you, sort of a thing. That used to be a thing. Like Lord of the Rings was not written for an audience, his audience were his kids, right? Harry Potter was not written for an audience, the audience were her kids. That sort of a thing. Like, where is that going?
Well, this you see a little bit of this in the gaming industry, and it's
Mm,
something that ends up diluting what people make. It's they try to make everything for everyone.
mm,
And when you try to please everyone, this is an old adage. When you try to please everyone, you often end up pleasing no one.
yeah.
It's better to stick to what you know that you can make that can
Mm,
appeal to a certain readership. You find your readership and you make that readership or your viewership happy in that regard. And when they're happy to spread the word about, hey, this is really good. I want you to look at this.
Hmm.
And this is often what they lack in. This is why storytelling by committee doesn't work. Studio interference doesn't help. They're trying too hard to make something that's appealing without trying to understand what makes it appealing. And that just ends up turning, as we've seen with the MCU and Star Wars, that ends up turning something that feels like a timeless epic into just content. Things
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, yeah.
It's
That's what
things
happened to
happen, the
Star Wars,
TV
isn't it?
show.
Yeah.
I could
I
go
mean,
off about
I
Star
don't
Wars for a long
even.
time.
Yeah, I haven't, like, because I don't know what's going on over there. And especially with the MCU, a long time ago with the Marvel Universe, I just lost touch with it a long time ago. I think so that might have been the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, maybe. So it's been a long time since I've just disconnected myself from it because it's just one thing after another that they're doing. They just overpopulated that universe and they're just trying to milk as much money as they can out of it. And when it comes to these shows about that that She-Hulk one, I have no idea what they were even trying to do over there. Like I have that's just like
Well,
I'm
the
sorry.
the writers of the show admitted what they were trying to do with it.
Oh really?
They had said in interviews that they viewed the fans that they knew were going to complain as the enemy, and they basically wrote them in as the enemy of the show. They didn't have any of the fun, the lightheartedness that made She-Hulk such a likable character to begin with. They turned her into a cipher for the writers' room, basically, and that's why that show did not work. And you have a lot of these online tribes. The people these days, the people that are supporting the MCU are just the people that are like anything that they put out. They don't care about the quality of it. They don't have any. They don't
They're
have
just
any
tribal
critical thinking.
allegiance or
A little
something.
bit, but there's also
Mm.
this element of they don't want the detractors to be right. So
Mm.
therefore, they circle the wagons as hard as they can, and they defend it as
So
hard as they
stupid.
can. And then what you end up seeing is down the road, whether a few months or over a year or something, they either act like they didn't care about it or they reverse course and say, I never
Yeah.
really liked it to begin with. You're going to
Yeah.
see some of that. You're going to see some people
Yeah.
going, I said the MCU was bad in Phase 4 all along. Like, no, no, no. We saw you
Mm.
defending it. That was a hill you
Yeah.
chose to die on. It's very
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like, it just seems like they made a tribe and they just don't want anyone who criticizes their tribe to be right, even though it's wrong. And eventually they're going to admit it because they know it's wrong, right? They just don't want the other person coming out from their tribe to say, oh,
Right.
no, there's something wrong with it.
They don't want
Yeah,
someone that they hate to be right about something.
yeah,
Cognitively, they cannot handle that kind of a thing. So that's why you end up in the nerd spaces with this football team mentality, sports team mentality
mm,
of I'm wrong, you're wrong, therefore whatever the
mm,
opposite must be completely right without having any kind of critical thinking
yeah,
about it whatsoever. And I don't really subscribe to that. To me, it all boils down to is this a bad story? Are these bad characters? If it's something good, I'll acknowledge it. But it takes a lot more than a bunch of action scenes
mm,
to get me invested in
yeah.
something.
But
Uh,
John, that used to be at the heart of it. But at least when I was a bit younger, that used to be at the heart of it. Nobody had a tribe like that, and we used to fight with each other
yeah,
so much over like little characters. Even though we both might like the character, like even within the Batman world, one would take like, oh no, I like the Joker more than the Penguin. Like even then, there would be really fierce
the,
arguments around this.
yeah, that's something that the normies that have kind of come into the nerd culture
Mm,
hobbies really don't understand.
no.
They have they have this mentality of just enjoy things, don't talk about things you don't like. It's like they're trying to shut down any dissidents. They don't understand that nerds have always been like this. We've
Yeah,
always fought and bickered with each other, and now they
the
come into
best of
space. They
friends
go,
used to do it.
there and they go, you don't stop fighting, stop arguing, stop. No, 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 no. This was what we did before you came along.
Yeah.
Okay, don't enter Thunderdome and then get mad because somebody throws a
Yeah.
punch at you.
I mean, and that's the thing, like, it used to be the best of friends, used to fight with each other, the most fiercest, right? It used to be the best of friends doing that to each other, and the like they didn't used to agree, and that was the whole point of it. And out of it, like you would come up with scenarios why it would be good, why it won't be good, why the writer didn't do anything about that and stuff, and you just just it was just creative thinking. And creative thinking needs critical minds, like it needs people to disagree with you so that you can come up with a better idea next time, sort of a thing, but yeah, you're right, I don't think so they got that at all. I don't think so they got the fan base at all. It's like, people, investors bought this, and now it's a product. A lot of executives came in. Oh, let's see what the demographics are. Oh, this is how many men are watching it. So we will cater to men. And it's like you don't even know what type of men they are, right? It's not a simple demographic. Oh, this many women are watching it. It's crazy. Yeah. One of the things though I want to touch on. I noticed recently, like, before, when like Tim Burton's Batman came, right? A long time ago.
I was
Um,
there. I'm of a
that was the first
certain
movie I watched, by
vintage.
the way.
I actually, a funny story, when that first came out. Now, that was like my introduction to Batman.
Yeah.
Yes, I am old enough to have seen that when it was in theaters, but fun fact, that movie I saw at a drive-through theater, the
Oh,
only
really?
drive-through theater I've ever been to in my entire
Wow.
life, and
No way.
that was really interesting.
The one in which there was Penguin, was that the second one?
That was the second one, Batman Returns.
So that is the first ever movie I watched in cinema. Like
Interesting.
I was really young. I think it was pre-Gulf War, I think so. I must have been three or something. Or something like, yeah, I think so, I was three or something, and I was crazy about Batman anyways. That was the first movie I ever watched. The thing about that is, like, when you watch it today, it's very silly, right? And that's what superhero movies used to be. They used to have that element of silliness because you're not supposed to take it like seriously. It's not supposed to be like, oh, how did, like, it's not supposed to be practical what they're doing. There's always supposed to be a death ray out of nowhere, right? There's always supposed to
Yeah.
be incredibly silly things in there. I don't see that silliness anymore.
Well, that's the thing, I think Christopher Nolan kind of helped bring this about because
Mm,
he basically didn't even make Batman movies. He made crime caper movies and inserted a guy
yeah,
in a bat suit in the middle of
yeah,
it. And for his and the thing is, the more realistic you make it, because that's always been a question in nerd
yeah.
cultures in the past, is like, what would it be like if we had
Mm,
superheroes or X-Men in real life? How would
yeah,
that happen? Like, we've had some people try, and we see kind of what happens. It ends up
yeah.
coming across as very, very like you really shouldn't do this,
Mm,
because superheroes are they're an archetype that we have been studying and that
mm,
have been told since the beginning of time. The idea of this bigger than life personality enters, jumping into the affairs of mortal men. And, there's an interesting appeal to that. That's something that has, permeated throughout centuries in storytelling. And it's just, superheroes are the modern incarnation of that.
mm.
And so it, I don't know where I was going with that.
I think so. It's sort of like when you watch the
Oh,
Christopher Nolan movie, they are my
sorry.
favorite movies, but yeah,
Right,
go
that's where
on.
I was at. That's where I was at for a
Yeah.
second. Christopher Nolan. The more real you make the superhero archetype, the kind of more people end up trying to deconstruct it because they
Mm,
try to pick
true.
it apart when it exists in that kind of a little too silly
Mm,
space. You have that suspension of disbelief that makes it much more believable. It's
yeah.
kind of like how some things work better in animation than they do in live action, right? There's a
Yeah.
suspension of disbelief when it comes to animation that, and especially with fantasy. Fantasy works very well in like comics and in cartoons because it has such over the top visuals. And then when
Yeah.
you try to put that into like real life, a lot of times what works best in a live action is from a fantasy perspective is what's more grounded in reality, stuff like Game of
Mm.
Thrones, because that was more about the political intrigue
Yeah.
than it was about the over the top visuals and magic. And that's why the
Yeah.
dragons stood out so much
Yeah.
in that
That
show
one
because
I saw like this the Game of Thrones was for adults, right?
yes,
That's why I saw it was written for the adults. Some are most fantasies are universal with they trying to incorporate the younger adult demographic with the adult demographic, but this was purely for the adult. It was not for kids, and that's why it had so much political intrigue, and like how governance is done and how policies are done, and like sort of like, and the dragon was a fun bit in there. The dragon was the unbelievable bit in there that linked that fantasy, you
right,
know.
but still felt real enough that it could actually
Yeah,
happen. I understand the
yeah,
appeal of Game of Thrones. Don't get me
yeah.
wrong. Yeah, the failings of it end up coming from a storytelling perspective,
Mm.
or at the very end. Now with the books, supposedly we have two more to go, and it's been 12 years since the last one.
Oh no, it really annoys me.
It's
But
it's
he's
very
such a
annoying.
good writer, though. He's such a good writer.
No, I'm not saying he's not a good
Yeah,
writer.
yeah,
I do think he made a mistake in trying to make this series as something of thumbing his nose at
yeah,
Tolkien, whose themes were
yeah,
men are good and men will prevail over evil,
yeah,
whereas Martin's perspective was, people are garbage and they're just going to treat each other,
mm,
kill each other, and treat each other like crap the whole time.
yeah,
And he set up a lot of characters. That's why the end of the TV show felt so bad because he set up a lot of
yeah,
characters to
yeah.
have victory laps and personal thematic victories, and then they just did not go through with that.
Yeah, that's the thing that the arc was not completed in his stories, and that's why it felt like that. I mean, I see that as a study of like it's an interesting study in that, and I think so that had to be done to understand that, right? Whereas Tolkien has followed a very classical way of like the hero's arc, and the hero arc in his one completes, and that's why it will stand the test of time. Because just like the story of Bible, the story of like every religious story and every like mythology story, it has that completion of the arc. That's why it stands the test of time. That's why everyone can relate to it, because you need to know that you are going to end up in somewhere good, right?
And
So
you got to understand as well that books are here. These stories are here for entertaining. I'm okay
mhm,
with a
mhm.
bittersweet ending.
Yeah,
But a bleak, unsatisfying ending is completely unacceptable.
yeah,
Your readers are sticking around for a certain resolution, and if you don't
mm,
deliver a satisfying resolution, they're going to resent you for it, and they're going to
yeah.
end up telling people,
Because they've
"Don't."
invested time, they invested effort, like they invested so
Yes,
much of their feelings to it, and then you're gonna, and it's not as if like you have to end it for the sake of it, but it has to have some, like you said, some strong resolution, whether negative, whether positive. If it's negative, then it has to be properly negative, just like enough so that that it's resolved in that sense.
right. And there's a bit of a promise between the author and the reader that you're going to bring this to a conclusion that they're going to like. That's why when I write, especially when I wrote The Black Crown, the first place I started is where do I want these characters to be at? Where do I want them to end up? And then I reverse engineered the story and I went backwards. How did they get here? What happened? What were the events that caused them to get here and want to get to this end? And then I found this is where I start at. And then I just end up working out the middle after that.
Yeah, I mean, the story that my book was like mystery and thriller, and that the spoiler for whoever hasn't read it, it doesn't end well, right? So I don't have good endings in that sense. Like nothing good happens usually in my head when I'm writing it. But it's a very different genre where the
Yeah.
reader expects that kind of ending as well, because that is more impactful. When it's not like when you end like mystery and thrillers, most of the time when you end it in a good ending, it doesn't feel right. Just like if you see suspense or thriller like Dexter, right? Dexter, the books, it didn't end well for him, right? So if it ends well, it doesn't make sense. He's a serial killer. right? So
Right.
yeah,
And that's and Breaking Bad was very similar. Is like
yeah,
he kept you were rooting for him to reach some kind of level of where he succeeded, but like the more it
yeah,
is just compounding, problem after problem,
yeah,
and it's thrilling to watch them have problems and him outthink his way through
mm,
them. But every breakthrough victory that he has ends up compounding with more issues on
and you
top of
know
more
it's coming.
issues. And it's like, eventually the chicken's got to come home to roost. I
Yeah,
don't think anybody expected there was a good ending for Walter
no,
White
no,
in Breaking Bad. And that in that case, and that kind of storytelling, that's expected.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
So,
different genre, especially like thrillers and mysteries.
mm,
You got to keep your readers on their toes, because
yeah,
that's a readership that's actively trying to figure out the mystery while they're
yeah,
reading. Whereas in fantasy, um, and my book's been out there for a few months, I can say there are some unexpected plot twists that I
mm,
put into the last third to. That I'm not going to spoil anything because I know you're reading it,
yeah,
but um, the kind of where was I going with this? I don't think I've had enough coffee yet. Uh, you're along for the ride,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And you're in a place that kind of feels like I want to see what happens to these
mm,
characters, but also at the same time, it's like I feel like I could go on the adventure with them. That's what I try
mm,
and bring across in my writings. Like these are characters you want to be with. You would want to go on this adventure with them if and at the best of times, you feel like you're there with them.
yeah, yeah. And I want to. It sort of makes me think about this as well. It's not like I or either you would like a specific template for everyone to follow, right? This is how you write a fantasy. Because I
Right.
see that a lot on like YouTube. Oh, this is how like famous writers saying this is how you write. It's like go fuck yourself. It doesn't matter, right? You just write it. It has to be a story, and then it comes out of you, right?
Right.
There are certain things you follow, yeah, like for good writing skills, for good like structure of sentences, structure of story. That's different, and it's good to experiment with different things. That's why I say like Game of Thrones is good in that sense because it's good. He did it his way. He wanted to do it like that. He bloody well did it, right? But
Right.
if everything becomes that, that's when I have a problem, right? So it's like then it's not different, or you're not trying to do it for the sake of it because you think like there's an audience for that kind of thing, so I'm gonna make just that sort of a thing. That's where I have a problem with like uh, with breaking the mold, but not for the artistry of it, right? So if we had a, let's say if we had a fantasy, like really intriguing fantasy, but that person is more in tune with the feelings and stuff. We dealing with the feelings of the person, however they're coming through their things and whatnot, but it's done in a balanced way, right? That would be fine. But
Yeah.
when everything becomes that, then it becomes a bit mundane, sort of like, well, you lost me now. I've understood the point in that story, and that was well done, but I don't want it drilled down on me all the time.
Right. That's the thing. It's a really tight it's a really tight balancing act
Hmm.
because I firmly believe that you should learn how to write a standard story before you have to know
Hmm.
where the boundaries are before you
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
breaking them.
Good
You
point.
have to know what works before before you figure in okay, how can I subvert this particular convention. Learning, there's nothing wrong with writing something very standard or something that feels copy pasted from
Hmm.
an existing work, like, say, Star Wars. Learn how to do it right before
Hmm.
you start figuring out where you can,
Good
move the
point.
walls and
Hmm.
expand on that
Hmm.
concept.
Yeah. So, what do you think about animes? I personally think now where we heading, more and more I find them better than movies or TV shows or anything of that sort because the production cost is lower than making a whole big ass movie, right? Um, it seems like the writers, whoever is actually writing it, has more control over the content and how it is being delivered, which means the story is a bit more true to that writer themselves. Forget about the audience, is more true to that, like, because that's what I see with a lot of these showrunners. Now we have showrunners, on the streaming channels, right? They are taking the story away from the writer, right? That's what happened with Witcher as well. I've heard like the writer of Witcher saying that, like, they're not listening to him anymore.
No, that's
So
obvious.
yeah, and that's sad to see. And I see within games, because games was always like, for a very long time, was the next frontier of storytelling. For a very, very long time, they were always were, but they were becoming more and more mainstream, right? So in games and in animes, you are more true. The writers are more true to the story. What do you think about that?
Anime is an interesting medium, and I've never been the most staunch anime watcher. I've only watched, a few series. My favorite one was Code Geass, and
Mm, that's
if
good.
have you seen Code Geass?
Yeah, but a long time ago.
You will probably notice there's a lot of Lelouch's DNA in Ragoth, the main character. That's one of my favorite conventions in any story type, is the young leader thrown into a position of power and trying to
Mm,
outfigure and outwit his enemies, Paul Atreides and Hiccup, and
mm,
a couple, Caesar from the Planet of the Apes movies. A lot of their DNA is in my main character. I like animes because it's such a interesting visual medium, and for storytelling, like they can, it almost feels like they could just do anything.
yeah.
And it again, that animation suspension of disbelief makes anything feel possible in an anime,
Mm,
and you don't get that from a lot of Western cartoons that are either trying too hard to be too soft these days, or they're trying to emulate what the anime is doing over in Japan. So, but the thing that they do right that a lot of the Western creators don't do is they're delivering what their audience wants. And, the creator makes a creative decision and he sticks by
mm,
it. And the audience usually reciprocates that. They usually end up really liking it. Although in some cases, I think could be made that maybe sometimes when these stories go on too long, they end up running out of ideas, or they end up
yeah.
zigging when they should have zagged. I think you're seeing that a little bit with the My Hero Academia fandom, because man, everyone loved that when it first came out, and I can't hardly find anyone who enjoys it now, saying that every time a new chapter drops, it's just everyone going complaining about what's going on.
Mm.
So
I
I
mean,
don't know.
not everything is going to be perfect, right? In that world, not every series, not every show is going to be perfect, but it's just the structure of it and the mechanism behind it. There seems to be two main things. One is like the lesser involvement of the production teams, right, and more connection with the creative, right? And the other as well is that their base audience is in a country whose culture doesn't seem to be as immature as ours have become, right? So our overindulgence in certain things, maybe that supports them because they can do those things. They don't have those immature precursors within their culture who is either guiding them somewhere else or corrupting the storytelling for the sake of telling an activist narrative. Their audience just wants to have a good story being told, and that's the base that they're working with. And that's why the more we weaken over here, we keep on getting more of the anime because we are thirsting for just storytelling.
And the opposite end of that is the creative that has no editorial oversight whatsoever. Um,
Hmm.
I have my editors that really kind of come in and say, "Hey, this doesn't work. This does work.
Yeah.
Maybe tighten up this right here." When you get
Hmm.
someone who has no editorial oversight whatsoever, like Hideo Kojima
Hmm.
and George Lucas at the in when he was making the prequels, and you have
Hmm.
nobody that's saying, "Hey, this doesn't work." You end up with some works that can feel very overindulgent
Hmm.
and that needed a little tightening up. You saw that with the Matrix sequels. They basically gave them free reign, and there was nobody to say, "Hey, this overly long
The
sequence
fourth one
of
was really bad.
I didn't even watch it. I knew
It
it
was
would be
so
bad,
bad. It's
and
so bad.
I was not even going to give it a chance because
No, you shouldn't.
hey, this overly long scene of them in the restaurant talking to this guy.
Yeah,
Uh, this is, I get the point they were trying to
that
make
was
with
an
it, but it was too long.
overindulgence. Yeah,
Yes, that was
yeah,
overindulgence. So,
yeah,
when you tighten up some of these things, you get that with somebody that's willing to tell you, I don't think this works.
yeah, yeah.
It,
But like,
again, balancing act.
yeah, balancing act. But I think so. It's also because they just driven. It seems like they know their audience, right? And they are making it. Obviously, everyone caters for an audience. You have to, at some point when you're producing something, you have to get some money back. But it also feels like they can experiment more because they're on the creative side. They just want to tell the story, and because the audience is expecting that. And I think so that matters a lot, right? So let's say, let's take a wild example of Bollywood, right, in India. So if in India you start making like a movie in South India, where there's a lot of movies people watch with a lot of dance scenes and a lot of music scenes. Yeah. So yeah, I was saying, like, let's take the example of India, right? So in India, in Bollywood, right, if you're making a movie, like, let's say around South India, where they like their music scenes, they like their dance scenes, and all of that jazz, right? Their movies will be like 4 hours long or whatever, with 1 hour of dancing, and they like that, right? Is their audience. And now you took all of that out completely, because you said, oh, it's misogynistic to show women dancing all the time, right? So whatever crap that you want to come up with, you say something like that, right? And all the movies don't have dance scenes anymore. Well, it's gonna crash, right? So it depends on what the audience is demanding, and you're listening to the audience to an extent, and within that you're creative, right?
I
So that's what anime seems like, that they have a
Yeah.
good audience base.
Yeah, and hey, respect to Bollywood, they kind of understand that. Look, the audience is looking to have fun,
Yeah.
and it can be. I've seen some Bollywood scenes that are so over the top
No.
and ridiculous. I'm like, this is my level of. I love stuff that's like awesome, stupid,
Yeah.
and in
And
my
that
books,
goes beyond.
yeah, and some of it is just like, why are we not doing this?
Yeah.
Everyone's
Yeah.
trying to. They have this idea that there's in Hollywood, the more grounded and realistic you make
Yeah.
it, the more believable it is, because that way, quote unquote, people will relate to it. Well, uh,
Not all the
that's
time.
no, not all the time. It doesn't always work out that way, because when you try to create, this is what they've got now. They're trying to make everyone relatable to everyone else,
Yeah.
but
I mean, where's
they're
the Dumb
trying to
and
make.
Dumbers? Where's the, like, all those funny, wacky movies and stuff? Like,
Well,
they're
they're
not
also
relatable at all.
afraid to offend anybody.
Yeah. That's
You
the
know,
thing, isn't it? And Japanese, they're not afraid of that. Their audience doesn't care
no,
about that. They will just not watch it if it's
uh,
not for them.
they think our politics and everything and complaining on Twitter is very, very
Mhm.
silly, and thankfully they seem to go out of their way to just ignore it.
Yeah, and that's why I said, like, a mature audience base is really good. So let's imagine a world where we can merge the indie world of the West better with the Japanese anime world, and we can create some link over there that makes it easier for indie stories to be made into animes. That's where I think
That
so
would be cool.
the whole fantasy mainstream of Hollywood crashes the next day. Because, like, they will
And it
have.
can't happen soon enough, if you ask me.
Yes, it has to happen. You
They
know.
they just announced not that long ago that the long-running indie fantasy comic ElfQuest is getting a one-hour drama adaptation, and I'm both a little afraid but a little kind of curious, because I do like ElfQuest. It's such a long. It's well deserved. It's something
Mm.
that's been running for a long time. They've always wanted to make an animated project out of it, and hopefully not something in the vein of the Dragonlance animated movie, which was terrible.
Mm. Mm.
But at the same time, it's that again, fantasy works really well in animation. That's why there's so much of it over in Japan coming out of
Yeah.
anime. And if I had a choice to what a medium I could adapt my book to, I probably would make it an anime series just because it would work better that way.
Yeah. And like I said before, like the production cost is low, way low comparatively to making a live action movie, and that gives you more reign to do more things, and you can imagine more things, to do more wacky things, because it's possible to make it, right? And also, I think so. There are two factors that the where I see the our indie scene going. Anyways, one of them is also audiobooks. When you're converting them into audiobooks, I think so. That's going to become more and more better, because you're not just doing an audiobook when you're doing with the fantasy. Like if you listen to some of the um fantasy one, like Lord of the Rings and other ones, and they had sound effects and everything else going on while they were narrating a story. So if like there's a horde of horses and stuff, you can hear the horde of horses going through. You can actually visualize it, right? And it makes it even better than watching anything, because no scene is going to be cut out of this book, right? It's going to be cover to cover everything,
Yeah.
but you're getting that experience of imagination, and you can transport that same thing into anime, because you don't have to cut that much if you make it into an anime series, because
Yeah.
it's not going to cost you that much.
And there's some elements of anime that I kind of lifted a little bit for my own work. Look, you when you understand what audiences like, you can kind of know how to integrate that into your own work. You'll notice in my book there's elements of slice of life and
Mm,
bits of cozy fantasy. Cozy fantasy is a very bit of a genre that's blowing up these days, where
mm,
characters are sitting around. The whole sitting around talking about your feelings thing. There's an element to cozy fantasy that really works in that regard, that I get because one
mm,
of my favorite games to used to play when I just wanted to chill out was Harvest Moon, and that is arguably there's no fail state in Harvest Moon. You're farming,
mm,
you're trying to find a wife, you're
mm.
picking eggs and milking your cows. There's an element to that that's enjoyable. To you just sit down
The
and just
side quest
really
sort of thing is enjoyable as well
almost.
in more games, yeah.
Right. But to me, I'm also a child of the 80s, so, I'm very big in the action adventure side of things. So to me, sprinkling out those slice of life things, that's why
Mm,
a lot of web comics that focus on slice of life stuff about, say, superheroes and fantasy stuff ends
mm.
up getting such a big audience. They find those elements between the action and the quests
Yeah,
very
yeah,
fascinating, and just
yeah.
watching and it is a great chance for your characters to interact with each other,
Mm.
and you get to showcase character interactions, and that helps the characters really build on their relationships. But to me, it's got to be sprinkled throughout a narrative, very,
Yeah.
kind of conservatively, and not going too long, because otherwise you risk boring your reader
Yeah, I
with
mean,
it.
like, did you play Red Dead Redemption?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I
and
played
the
both
Red
those
Dead
games. They're
Redemption
great.
2, right? It's such a beautiful story. There's, the scene where that I can't remember their names, but the other one dies when they on the hill towards the end, right?
Yeah.
And he's just lying down and he's just looking through the scenery, like, because he's dying, he sacrificed himself. It's such a beautiful emotional scene, right? Better than any story that has been told for a very long time. It's such a good story, and that scene is so, it ties the whole everything together, right? But there's action. There's so much action over there,
Plenty
right?
of
And
it
that's
too.
such a beautiful balance.
Yeah, that is a beautiful game, and I'm glad they didn't ape the ending of the first game,
Mm,
because the end of the first game was very bittersweet,
yeah.
and tragic, and it kind of it made that first game actually makes hits, I think, a little harder
Mm,
when you
mm,
play the second game first and
yeah.
see what came before, and you
Mm,
start to pick up on all the little Arthur, I have a plan, like that. Those
yeah.
lines impacted so much more after you play
Yeah.
the second game.
Yeah.
And
And
I think,
that's the
but
beauty of games, isn't it? When
yeah,
they're done like this.
I'm with Razor Fist on games as a storytelling medium. They need to stop
Mm.
trying to be interactive movies
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's
focus on
true.
being games.
Yeah,
It's the
yeah.
game interaction element that we come for, and the more you add those game elements. Red Dead Redemption 2, probably a perfect example. It'll probably be a perfect game for a long time before
Yeah.
that gets usurped because
Mm.
there's so many game elements. There's so many role playing elements, and the storytelling is there, but it does
I
it in the
can't remember
context of a game.
the last game that I played that had that much story. I mean, Hideo Kojima, he does that, like, because
Yeah.
has that genre of like with Metal Gear Solid and stuff like that. That
The,
sometimes is a bit too much
yeah.
story,
He
and
is.
then you're in. It feels like you're just filling the gap while the other story is loading, right?
Yeah,
Just going from that place to that
his
place.
storytelling doesn't work for me because it's very overindulgent. They don't
Yeah.
tell him no. They don't parse it
Mm.
down. Even Metal Gear Solid, which when I first played, I loved it. I hit a point in the later parts of that game where I'm going, okay, we're now in this point in this game where we are pausing for 15-20 minute cutscenes between
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah. That
Uh,
becomes too much.
just conversations. That part where you're traveling back and forth to try and heat up and freeze the keys to get
Yeah.
into the final area of the game. And I'm like, okay, and it a lot of the storytelling does work. It's just there's so much of
You
it
have to have
where
balance.
a
Yeah.
little bit, yeah, and then after that, they let them make whatever decisions they want. And Metal Gear Solid 2, for as okay as it turned out to be, was a creative direction that a lot of people just didn't like. That was kind of where I
Mm.
kind of fell off with the series a little bit.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, like one of my most favorite games, probably of all time. I don't know, most it doesn't rank in anyone's list most of the time. When I see is Dino Crisis, and I played
Oh
that a long
yeah.
time. I
Oh, my
played that a
wife
lot.
loved that
It's
game.
one of my most favorite games because it was so hard to play. I don't know if maybe I was young. I was way, way young when I was playing it, and it was hard for me then.
Well, it wasn't just
But
you. Those old school Capcom tank controls were nobody's
yeah,
friend.
yeah, and plus, like I specifically remember there was a key that you had to find out, and the way that you could find out was there was a music playing, right? And then you have to listen to what the music is in monotone, like do 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 do, and then you have to go on the keypad and see which key makes that sound, do 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 do, and that's the code, right? And I
Hmm.
was like, it was so difficult to figure that out and to do it, especially at that age. That's what those games made it for me as well. It had cutscenes, and at that time I was like, "Oh my God, what graphics is so real!"
Yeah, the
As you grow,
transition to 3D gaming was really wild. A
yeah,
lot of experimentation, a lot of people trying to figure out how to make it great. And then they
yeah,
mastered it in the PS2 era. That game system was great. It had such an amazing library.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
was
And that's the thing,
talking.
like the difficulty. I feel because they want to tell a story only, the difficulty of the game has reduced a bit.
A
Have you
little.
noticed that a little bit? You
To
have to
some
put it
extent,
on really hard.
that you have to see the most prominent example of that is the new God of War games, which were a great narrative direction for them until it kind of come to the point where like this really people were
Mm,
missing this feel of the old school game and feel
yeah,
like where's the badass Kratos who took absolutely no prisoners and gave no quarter and just was balls to the wall 100% focused on his quarry. And the God of War, the new God of War games, I think they're a great TV show,
mm,
but when it
mm,
comes to the gameplay, they have such a distrust for their audience being able to figure anything out. The biggest complaint of the most
yeah. That's
recent
the
one,
thing.
Ragnarok, was the side characters. Like you're not even 5 seconds into a fight or a puzzle, and the side characters are telling you what to do, and they're telling
Yeah,
you what to do over and over again. And you had streamers that were just screaming at the screen, "Stop! Shut up! Is there a way to turn off the
yeah,
side character hints?
yeah.
Have a little
And
faith in
that's why I love Dino Crisis, because it was so difficult. It drove me crazy. Like I need to, like, every time I have to try this again, try this again. That was in Resident Evil games as well. Resident Evil 3, that was like a bit difficult as well. Again, maybe just because of my age at that time. Like, but like it was that difficulty that you had to overcome along with the story that used to make the games. It's not like, I'm just playing it for the story. I'm playing it for the entertainment as well. With Dino Crisis, especially, like you had very limited ammunition. So if you just kill these dinosaurs in this corridor and you went gun happy on them, now you don't have any guns left. Now you only have tranquilizer left. So you'll have to like, tranquilize a dinosaur and you only have a minute or two to do that, like, part of the game. That
Yeah,
that
which
way
ones do
when
you
they,
kill and which ones do you just dodge? And you had no
exactly.
way of knowing, and that it
No.
lended itself to a little bit of replayability in the games.
Yeah.
I never, when it comes to difficulty, like I have a terrible twitch reflex, so
Mm.
I can't. There's a lot of games that are all practically inaccessible to me. Elden Ring's probably a good example, although I
Mm.
haven't really tried it. Um, when it comes to just if something is too difficult to the point that it becomes annoying, I really
Yeah.
lose interest in it. That's one reason I like role playing, and JRPGs
Yeah.
are my favorite
Mm.
genre because
Mm.
if I reach up to a point where I'm like, oh, okay, the enemies in this area too hard, go back to that last area and grind for a few levels and come back and God mode them. Basically,
Yeah.
uh, that's the kind of thing that I like. Plus, I like the long stories that come with
Yeah.
JRPGs.
Yeah. So what else do you see, like where is the mainstream going wrong? Is there any other way that they're going wrong? And what do you see like is the future of, well, there is two different things, right? So fantasy is very different from superhero fiction. Other people might, mix them together, but they are very, very different because they follow different formulas
Right.
and they follow different, very, very different storylines and patterns, and even fan bases are very different.
Where they're going wrong is where a lot of industries are going wrong in that uh, trying to blame fan blaming is probably the thing that
Yeah.
annoys me the most. If I get a whiff of a TV show or a comic book or a game where the creators of it are standing there wagging their fingers and trying to lecture you about something that you as a fan, I will immediately nope out because I don't feel that attacking a fan base is
Person who's paying the
justifiable.
money for it.
Right, you are literally biting the hand that feeds you. You should
Mm.
be trying to pander to gamers and trying to sell. Uh, you sell whatever you're making to them and appreciating your fan base instead of trying to say we don't want this part of the fan base, we want this part of the fan base, so we're going to tell the other fans that we don't like to just fuck off. And you've seen this backfire in the comic industry greatly. You've seen the complaints about the MCU since Endgame go completely unheeded, and there's only so many amount of normies and shills that can
Mm.
watch that. Where I mean,
They're
you
not
look at
going
what
to be,
happened.
see, John, they're not going to be as invested as we would be
Right.
in those things, right? They will watch it as a standoff, and they might not watch the second part of it, whatever. They'll watch the third part of it because they're just watching it for the experience, like, And most of time when you're watching it with someone and say, "Oh, that's not believable," and you go like, "Well, they're magicians over here. What the fuck are you expecting? Like, they're throwing fireballs off their ass. Why are you
Right.
expecting it to be believable?" But do you think this is happening um, because of disconnect between the person who's making and the grind, right? So, and like sort of like, people who don't like understand, who waste meat when they're eating it, and because they are disconnected from the production, like how we get the meat, sort of thing, right? and
Yeah, a
and
little bit.
right, and these producers are sort of like, they're attacking the fan base because they don't understand where their money is coming from, because they don't have to grind for it. They're like student activists and stuff who have a job, who've been just given a job, right? And they're a bit disconnected from where their production comes from, sort of
Right.
thing.
From their perspective, the selling point is the brand name, right?
Mm,
Star Wars, Star Trek,
mm,
Marvel. Like the hard work has already been done in establishing these IPs, and they think that they can simply, take out what they don't like, put in what they do like, and that the fans will just watch it without any complaint. And they've been doing this for at least 7, 8 years, and it's really not panning out. This is where you get a lot of the fights coming from in nerd culture stances, no matter what corner, whether it's books or comics or movies, where they're trying to piggyback on the shoulders of better creators,
mm,
and Rings of Power, great example. They tried to stand on the shoulders of somebody who was better than them, and thought that they could do better.
Yeah,
They did
I
not
do
even.
not
They didn't even.
understand that.
Yeah, they
I
didn't
mean,
even
fucking
rise to the
Tolkien,
level.
man.
Or that's best case scenario is they just don't understand the source material.
Yeah,
The worst case scenario is they think the source material is
yeah.
problematic and they know better and they can do whatever they did. You saw that with Wheel of Time, the TV show. That shows that world's lore was ruined within 1 minute of that first
hmm
episode,
hmm
and
I
it
didn't watch it
showed.
after the first episode.
Yeah, it demonstrated that they had a fundamental lack of
hmm
understanding about how to tell the stories that Robert Jordan told. You even had the man who finished his books, Brandon Sanderson, on the side saying, "Do this, don't do that," and they took some of his advice, but they ignored the lion's share of it. And he, bless his heart, he's tried to remain congenial with that industry, probably because at some point he wants, his own stuff to be made. But I have to
Yeah.
imagine he wants it to be adapted correctly, and he's not
Mm.
going to allow them to. He's not going to allow them to take a wrong step with his work.
Yeah, I mean, and I think so. The Rings of Power, or like the thing what happened with the Rings of Power is not just that Tolkien was dead, but also that Christopher Tolkien was dead,
Yeah,
right? And there was no one left who was that invested into maintaining the legacy, right? So they said, okay, yeah, you
yeah,
can do
and
this, and you
and
have this spot.
yeah, and Tolkien's grandkids do not care. If you watch interviews
No,
with them,
yeah,
they're reprehensible.
mm,
They only care that the IP is worth money and it keeps them from ever having to work again a day in their life.
yeah,
There's no ideal in their blood to
yeah,
protect the vision. I
yeah.
will say this though. I'll say this. When it comes to Tolkien adaptations, look, we probably got the best adaptation we could possibly get with the Peter Jackson movies. Look,
hmm
I'm all for, like, I know they're going to readapt movies, okay?
mm,
Do something, if you're going to adapt Tolkien's works, do something radically different, do a different kind. A lot of people are like, don't do like a race swap version. I'm like, no, no, no. We've already got the best version of this movie. Go ahead, do an all black version of Lord of the Rings.
yeah,
See what can come of that. Do an
yeah.
animated adaptation, and I don't mean the
That
ones
would
from
be
the
the
'70s.
best. That would be the best.
I don't mean the ones from the '70s. They
No,
are what they are. But look, even when I was 12 and I loved watching animated fantasy flicks,
no, that
I
wasn't
saw
good. Yeah.
those and I'm like, this looks kind of
hmm
old and kind of goofy, and
Yeah.
I didn't care for it even when I was a
No.
kid. I appreciate what Ralph
Yeah.
Bakshi did,
Yeah.
but do an animated version. Or here's an interesting idea: what they should have done for a TV show, because you've never seen Hollywood ever do this. Just do a 1-1 adaptation from the books. Just
Mm.
because they always say, "Oh, you can't do that." How do we know? You've never tried. I've never seen them try to do a 1-1 adaptation of a book
Mm.
into a film, like, or a TV series. Like, they had the money to do that. They could
Yeah.
have,
Yeah.
do that and see what you get. See what being completely
Yeah.
100% faithful to Tolkien gets you. It
I
could
mean,
be interesting. It could be a flop, but you couldn't say then that you weren't faithful to Tolkien.
yeah. I mean, I would love to see a Japanese version anime, but a Japanese version of Tolkien, right?
That
Everyone is
might be interesting.
Japanese. Yeah,
You know,
right?
we,
With the
we've got to,
Japanese culture within it.
yeah, get some different perspectives in on it. I don't mind.
Oh, that would be so
I just
awesome.
don't like the idea of the new movies because they're going to try and basically ape the more
Yeah.
successful Tolkien
Yeah.
Jackson films, and
Yeah.
that to me is a mistake. It's like if they
Yeah.
remade Jurassic Park, I would
Mm.
argue I'd be all for that, but keep the original tone and plot of the book,
Yeah.
because the Jurassic Park
Otherwise, it
movie,
just loses it. It
right?
loses that magic because the thing is, there is something that created that story, right? There was a mind in a place with a particular experience, with a particular bend, in a particular era that created it, right? And the reason why you still listening to it, you're still reading it, because it has stood the test of time. That is something that you don't want to mess with. Like that core, you have to keep that core because that
Yeah,
has come from something that you actually will never understand. We can pontificate about it, we can make theories about it, just like trying to understand Shakespeare. You will never understand what was in his head. You will never understand where it came from, his work. you know, the best thing that you can do is like whatever adaptation of his work you're going to do, you have to keep to his core text
Yeah,
of what he's
look,
trying to
they
portray.
did that in the '90s. There was that '90s version with Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate
Hmm.
Winslet, and I thought it was always a little weird, but like they kept the original text, right?
Yeah.
And they just made it about people living in modern day, and it was like a gang warfare,
Hmm.
and like that worked. That at the time that came out, that was very, very popular. I didn't care for it at all
Hmm.
because I just didn't care, you know. but but amongst my contemporaries at that time, it was really popular. They really liked it.
Hmm.
At
Hmm.
least the core, the heart was kept there. Yeah, keep the heart and the core of the story. That's why
Yeah.
Rings of Power didn't work. One, because it was an adaptation of it was fan fiction. They
Hmm.
did not have the rights to the Lord of the Rings or the
Hmm.
Silmarillion. They had the rights to the appendices of
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings, and that's just a bunch of historical text. There was no dialogue for them to work with. Like two-thirds of the characters in that show were fan made. So
Yeah.
the it was a very rough plot line that they followed too. Uh, it was fan fiction. It was $1 billion fan fiction. That's why it
Yeah.
didn't
It
work.
was so expensive as well.
I
It's
can't
like,
believe it.
why would you do that? If you wanted to do that, you could have done it as anime, test it out, test your theory out if it works or not, or something, right?
Yeah,
And then like make a short movie, right? So that is what they should, if they had any sense, you can do. You can make an animated short story out of it. See if there's interest in this style of fan fiction and then invest money into it.
yeah.
Don't go. But they had an idea. They had, like, the thing is, they didn't wanted to create Lord of the Rings. They wanted to take one of the most famous fantasies to promote their activist agendas. Right? That's what they had in mind from my point of view. It wasn't like they didn't seem to have any love for Tolkien or appreciation for the story or the fan base at all. They're like,
No,
okay,
no,
we
they
have an
definitely
agenda and we can
they,
add people in and like
they
we'll
were
do this.
trying to make their own fan base out
Yeah,
of it, and it
yeah.
really just did not
It's
work.
stupid. So stupid. Yeah. And so what do you see where we heading with fantasy and then where we heading with superhero fiction as well?
With superhero fiction, it's never going to fully die out, but I think we are in the area of audiences are a little tired of it, and because the last few offerings from DC were pretty like mid, they were just kind of generic, and they probably would have been very well received if they'd been done maybe 10 years ago. But now it's to the point where, and even the last Aquaman that came out, like that was just a silly, fun, over the top.
Yeah.
Like that was the Aquaman movies, believe it or not, were exactly the kind of thing that you and I were talking about. Just fun, silly, a little over the top, and didn't take itself too seriously. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But we've reached a point where if you can't one up a lot of the superhero movies that have come before,
Saturation, isn't it? Market
yeah, the
saturation.
oversaturation has made people kind
Hmm.
of indifferent to every new origin movie coming out,
Hmm.
and they're DC still trying to
Let me
recapture the
interject.
magic that Marvel made years ago, and
Do
they've already
you
lost that plot.
do you think like a major part of losing interest in the superhero movies, right, is the loss of audience? I do not see that many kids reading comics anymore,
No,
as I did
unfortunately
people around
not.
me.
A little bit of it is the lack of synergy between the movie company and the comic end of things. They have
Hmm.
never at any point tried to curtail um kids into reading the comics. There was you when the first Avengers movie dropped, Marvel did not do the smart thing and reverse course with characters like the gender flipped
Hmm.
Thor
Hmm.
and a different Captain America. Like they kept on their course. Like they could have tried to curtail that and like give comics away when you went to the theaters, things like that.
Hmm.
You should have had the movies and the comics kind of in line with the same characters. So that
Yeah.
Black Panther was a huge hit in 2019, but
Hmm. Oh yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
it did
Yeah.
not do anything for the Black Panther comic
No, no, it didn't.
sales, and like that was a lost opportunity.
It
So
seems
it's
like when Stanley died, like the whole in like that Marvel industry have lost all interest in comics. They're seeing like comics is a waste of money. It's only like these nerds that
Yeah.
they're not our demographics anymore. Anyways, our demographics is this now. Like, so we catering for that. So nobody reads comics anymore. Kids are just watching like animes.
All
Well,
right.
if you're not going
And
to provide it, they're not going to read it as well. So,
and the lion's share of the remaining comics fans and readers have kind of shifted into the indie spaces, and
which
they're
is good.
either buying other indie comics to kind of fill that gap, or they end up making their own comics
Mm,
to, and that's always, you've got several examples of that in history where people who are dissatisfied with what the creative directions that a big corporate IP is going, that they'll end up creating their own rivals. Like,
mm,
for instance, Don Bluth was a disgruntled Disney animator, and he absolutely ate Disney's lunch when it came to animated movies in the 80s.
mm,
You had, what was it? WWE spun off AEW with disgruntled wrestlers and fans.
yeah,
Arguably,
yeah,
they're not really competition now, but that's a whole other
mm,
discussion.
yeah.
Look, people did not like fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, so you had a company that recreated essentially the 3.5 system, and that wound up being Pathfinder. So
Mm.
D&D's biggest competition is basically itself. It's a former edition published as Pathfinder now. And that was another example of this. Like, Image Comics was created from disgruntled Marvel and DC creatives who were
Mm,
tired of being told what they wanted, what they could or couldn't do, but as well as not really having any control over the characters that they created. So
mm.
again, they're going to end up creating their own competition, and they're not going to course correct until it's probably too late. And by then you'll have an audience that will have been siphoned off forever from that end.
Oh
And
yeah, I think that they're going to fold.
comics for the last 20 years has really struggled to recreate or come up with
Mm,
a new hook to get new readers involved in it. Now, as far as fantasy goes, I can tell you what's going to happen. From my perspective, there are some inklings in the industry that the publishers really do not push big authors, or I mean, smaller authors or even newer authors. I'm probably going to make a video at some point today because I found an
mm.
established author, Laurel K. Hamilton, deriding self-publishing on TikTok. Well, it's all well and good for her to say she's been published for a long time, and she's
Yeah,
like, give traditional publishing a try. Like, from my perspective, that's where
no,
your book is going to go to die.
yeah,
And even if publishers are not going to initially or on their face, they're saying don't touch self-published authors. That's going to reverse course because they're still asking their smaller authors to do a lot of social
mm,
media marketing, get more involved, and get in with like the independent reviewers on what you call BookTube or BookTok or
mm,
Bookstagram. I think what you're going to end up seeing is you will have indie authors who will get very, very big and have a big established fan base, and you will see the publishers try to swoop in and grab them up because they think that the
yeah,
audience is going to come with them to their tradition, their book now traditionally
mm,
published. In some cases, that has happened. Um, Alexander Darwin was a self-published author, and now he's published under Orbit with his Comeback Codes books. Larry Correia was a self-published author, and now he's under Baen, and he's one of their biggest sellers. Travis Baldtree came out with a cozy fantasy, and arguably his book helped kick off a lot of cozy fantasy craze. Uh,
mm,
what was it called? Legends and Lattes. And he got picked up by Tor, and they republished his book, and like that, the fans that initially bought it came back through and they bought it again and they bought the audiobook. So I think you're going to end up seeing self-published indie authors that get very big with big readerships get picked up by publishers because they're saying
mm,
that's where the readers are.
yeah.
They have a big fan base and they're just going to pluck some out and try to bring them over to the traditionally published side.
What I would like to see. I don't mind like indie authors going to traditional because there's a lot of things that is taken care of that is, so that it lets you spend more time on the creative side of things. And I can understand like there's an established market base that you're trying to tap in. But what I would like to see from the any of the indie authors that are coming big and going into traditional is that to negotiate a higher sales percentage, right? A higher rate for themselves.
Yes.
So a royalty rate, sorry, that's what I was going to say. A rate of royalty, a higher percentage than they only give as much as 20% to the higher ones, right? So no, negotiate at 40%, negotiate higher, and have more of a creative control. So that it means that now the mainstream publishers have lost that much of a control that they used to have. That is going to be a good move for other indie authors as well. Like, for the upcoming authors, it's going to help other people.
I would hope so, because there's a lot of authors, even traditionally published ones, who are they're not getting paid very well by traditional
Mm,
publishers. And you dig a little bit into it, and guys like John Della Rose know this for a fact. Like, they're not making. They're not becoming big breakthrough millionaires overnight, and there's very few. I don't even know if that will even happen. The breakthroughs are coming through on the social media, and I mean, you look at
mm,
one of the more recent ones that blew up on TikTok, which is Fourth Wing and its sequel Iron Flame. The quality of the book is dubious, because I see a lot of mixed feelings and mixed reviews to that book, but it's undeniably a success. But it didn't become a success because the publisher picked it up. It was a success on Book Talk first, and
mm.
then it kind of broke through into everyone's TBRs, and everyone's like, "Oh, well, what's that FOMO, fear of missing out, starts to kick in? Like, oh, what is this? Why is everyone reading this? I want to find out."
Mm, mm. That's good. I mean, I think so. There is a better future ahead. It just we need risk takers to actually, believe in themselves and pave the way for it, because the audience is tired of the same old sort of things.
Yes.
And indie spaces, like more and more indie writers in fantasy and other places, they're getting better with their writing, and the impression of indie writers is getting better, although it's not helped by some indie writers, which is a lot of those some, which is the majority of that some in my experience, who are not paying for editors, who are not quality controlling their work, who do not have good book covers, and like they're not investing in their product, and like those who are just creating smut, like sort of a thing. It's like it gives that
And they sell.
impression.
They
And
sell.
I know they sell. Like, yeah, that's the thing, they sell. But it's sort of like, when you see the self-published world, that's the image like some of the people still have of the self-published world. And as soon
I
as the
I
image comes through for what it actually is, especially with the fantasy world, right? With the fantasy world, the indie scene is way, way different compared to any other place,
yeah.
any other genre.
I
And then
think
when
that
people start seeing it, impression is going to change.
Oh yeah, and that's already been changed over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. It has really changed, as the Macho Man always said, "The cream rises to the top." And you have
Mm.
seen the indie authors really start to take the branding of their books very seriously. They hire really good They hire really good artists for their covers. They hire editors to make sure that it's up to snuff. And the stuff that's just out there and it's not not great quality ends up earning that reputation, and it ends up what's good ends up rising by word of mouth, and word of
Yeah.
mouth has really started to push. That's
Yeah.
why I pivoted my
Especially with
channel.
social media as well. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I pivoted my channel away from just general pop culture commentary into
Mm.
trying to signal boost what indies I found that were great. Only in indies can you find. I'm not going to pluck all the books off my shelf because it would be too
Yeah.
noisy and take too long. Stuff like Watcher of the Damned by R.H. Snow. It's basically
Mm.
Beauty and the Beast set in Fallout with a heavy Western aesthetic. Or there's one behind me,
Brilliant.
The Tome of Apula. It's a story,
Yeah.
about a vampire gorilla who kind of attains human-like sentience, and it's like
Wow.
it's so silly, but
It
it's
that's the
so
that's the thing. That's the beauty of it.
it's a
That was
fun
the
read
yeah.
though.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think so. The future is looking good. Hopefully, like, and indie authors as well need to support each other more. They need to be stop being selfish. Some of them, like, we when we grow, it's better to grow together. Need to have that mentality, signal boost each other, which are good and help each other out.
And for the
But
most
yeah,
part, we do.
yeah. Yeah, and I think so that needs to continue, and hopefully we'll get into a good place where we can have our stories back to what they were used to be, and get this propaganda activism out of our escapism. where it is meant to be, you know. And I think so that's a good place to end the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you
And
for
all
having
the
me.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant talking to you about this. And all the links for your book and for your podcast are going to be in the description. So please go check it out, everyone. And yeah, until next time, take care, be good, and thank you so much for listening.